Back button focus has long been a go-to autofocus method, especially for moving subjects. But with today's advanced subject detection, some say it's outdated. I'm going to tell you what I think on today's episode of
Ask David Bergman.
Hey there everybody, welcome back. Here I am, as always, answering your photography questions right here on Adorama TV. If you've got a photo question, you know what to do by now. Just go to askdavidbergman.com, submit that form on the site, and I just might pick your question and answer right here on a future show. I've got a quick announcement before we dive in. I've hosted over 100 Shoot From the Pit live concert photography workshops over the years, and after many requests, I'm finally bringing it back. On April 16th of this year, 2025, I'm hosting a special edition at Category 10, which is Luke Combs' official bar and concert venue in Nashville, Tennessee. What you'll do is you'll spend the day with me learning to shoot concerts, sports, and really action of any kind. And then that night, you'll photograph Luke Combs UK, an amazing tribute band on their first United States tour. We'll also do professional band portraits with off-camera flash, so you're going to leave at the end of the day with killer live shots and pro-quality portraits. It's an incredible opportunity to gain real-world experience in an iconic venue. Sign up after you watch this video, of course, by going to shootfromthepit.com. If it's already sold out, or if you just can't make this one, join my free email list on the site for future workshop updates. All right, with that out of the way, we'll get on to the show. Today's question was sent in by Senthil K, and he wants to know, in this day and age where almost all cameras have face and subject detection, does back button focus still matter? What's the advantage of using it over subject detection? It's a great question, and thanks so much for sending it in. Now, if you've watched any of my videos about focus, or you've been to one of my live workshops, you know that I use and I love back button focus. And here's why. This is what we're talking about. When autofocus was introduced like 40 years ago, they combined two functions onto the shutter button, taking the picture and activating autofocus. But those are two completely separate actions, and controlling them together isn't always ideal. Now, I understand that for a hobbyist just starting out, it's easier to just mash down that button and let the camera do everything for you. But at a certain point, you want to take control of what's happening. For moving subjects, you should already be on servo or continuous AF, which constantly adjusts your focus for you. But relying on a half press of the shutter button can be frustrating. If you put too much pressure on it, you're going to fire the shot too soon. If you let go too early, you're going to lose your focus. It also complicates your composition. If you want your subject off center, you've got a half press, lock your focus by pressing the AF lock button, recompose the shot, then press the shutter button the rest of the way to finally take the picture. Then if you want to take a second shot, you've got to start that whole process all over again. It's really a mess. Back button focus is going to make this much easier for you. Now, how you set it up depends on your camera, but on most Canons, you go into the menu where you customize the buttons. By default, the shutter button is set for metering and AF start. Metering just means that the camera starts reading the light and shows the meter in the viewfinder. That doesn't really affect autofocus. AF start is what we're concerned about here, and we don't want that on the shutter button. Switch it to just metering, and now the shutter button only takes the picture. So to activate autofocus, how do you do it? Well, most cameras, like this one here, this is the EOS R1, have a back button right there that you can program. This one, right where my thumb naturally rests when I'm taking a picture, it literally says on it, AF on, autofocus on. It says that already. By default, that button is set to metering and AF start. You can double check it in your settings. If it's not, you can program it. But now that back button is the only one that starts your autofocus, not the shutter, just that back button. And since I'm in servo AF, as long as I hold it down with my thumb while I'm shooting, the autofocus is going to keep moving. Then I can take a picture separately anytime I want without dealing with that silly half button press. Now, if I want to lock focus, all I do is just lift my thumb off of that back button. That's it. Focus is on when I'm pressing and off when I let go. You just have to get used to holding that down and then taking the picture separately. Using back button focus with servo AF makes focusing on a moving subject so much easier. Holding that back button feels natural. It's really a natural point for you, and as long as you're pressing it, autofocus is working. You can shoot anytime without delay, which means a better chance of nailing those great action shots. Now, if you want to put your subject off center, you just put your focus point on your subject, press with your thumb to focus, then just let go. Now you can recompose Place your subject anywhere in the frame and shoot all day long without the focus changing. As long as you or your subject doesn't move out of that focus plane, they're going to be sharp. Now, I know this is a big change for a lot of photographers if you haven't shot that way. There's a learning curve when you switch to this because your brain has to separate focus from the shutter. The best way to switch is to just go cold turkey. You can't go back and forth. If you do that, you'll never really fully adapt. Maybe don't try it first on a big important shoot, but once you commit to it, you'll never look back, I promise. Now, what about subject detection? Well, the latest mirrorless cameras can recognize and track subjects automatically. These Canon cameras, for example, can look for an eye, then a face, then a head, then an upper body, and finally a full body if nothing else is visible. This is amazing for moving subjects. If somebody's eyes get blocked by a hat or their face is covered by a helmet, the camera still tracks them. It works for people, animals, and vehicles, so whether you're shooting wildlife, sports, or motorsports, the camera is going to follow your subject without having to do anything. So, with all that, does back button focus still matter? Some photographers say that back button focus is mainly for focus and recompose, and subject detection means you don't have to do that anymore. Mirrorless cameras have AF points that cover the whole frame, so subject detection finds the subject anywhere. And if that's your reason for using back button focus, then yes, that's true. Subject detection has mostly eliminated that need. You really don't have to focus and recompose anymore. But back button focus was never just for that. It's really about control. Subject detection is great, but what if the camera picks the wrong subject? If I'm photographing a concert and want to focus on Corey playing keyboards in the background instead of Luke singing in the foreground, subject detection can't possibly know that. With back button focus, I can place my focus point on Corey, press the back button, and let go, locking focus exactly where I want. And then I can keep shooting until as long as I want, and it's not going to change focus. If focus were on the shutter button, I could get the first frame right, but every time I repressed it, the camera would likely refocus on Luke. Even when subject detection actually tracks what I want, back button focus keeps the focus engaged while firing off shots without holding down that half press. For fast action like basketball or concerts or anything like that, you want focus locked, not resetting between bursts. Now, there are also times when you don't want to refocus at all, shooting through like haze at a concert or a fence or through a crowd of people. Once you have focus, you want it to stay put. Back button focus lets you lock it and keep it there. I personally take this even further by programming a second autofocus button on the back. One activates subject tracking, the other uses the old-fashioned stationary focus point. That way I can choose whether I want tracking or a fixed focus point at any moment just by moving my thumb back and forth between those buttons. Both are back button focus technically because they're both back there, and I don't use autofocus on the shutter. That's the important point. Sometimes people will leave focus on the shutter and say they're using back button focus, but as long as that shutter is activating your focus, you're not technically using back button focus. You want to eliminate focus from the shutter and only have it on that back button. I actually did a video on my dual back button focusing technique a few years ago, and it's changed how a lot of people shoot. I'll link to it below if you haven't seen that. So Senthil, subject detection is amazing, but it doesn't replace the need for control. Back button focus lets you decide when to focus and when to stop, and that's why it's still as valuable today as it's ever been. What do you all think? If you shoot back button focus, can you imagine ever going back? Or maybe you stopped after discovering subject detection. Let me know down in the comments below and we'll talk about it. Remember, you can send in your own photo questions by going to askdavidbergman.com. If you do like these videos, I appreciate you hitting that like button and, of course, subscribing to the Adorama YouTube channel. Go ahead and click that bell icon so you'll be notified when new shows come out from me and all the hosts here on Adorama TV. Thanks so much for joining me and hope to see you next time right here on Ask David Bergman.